Tonight, we follow the footprints of a metal that has outlived every empire humans ever built. A silent character, yet one that tells stories more clearly than any historian. A light that never fades, whether it lies buried for billions of years beneath the earth or locked inside cold vaults deep under central banks. Let your body loosen, let your eyes grow heavy, and your mind, let it walk with me 6,000 years back, then slowly step through each civilization, each war, each fear, each dream humanity once placed upon gold. Not everyone realizes it, but the history of gold is also the history of human anxiety. Each time an empire felt fear, it hoarded gold. Each time markets panicked, gold rose. Each time people stopped trusting one another, they returned to this silent metal, clutching it the way a child holds an old blanket to sleep through a storm. But before becoming a symbol of safety, gold was just a tiny thing, a glimmer hidden in the mud, a fragment of the sun torn from the sky and trapped at the bottom of a stream. Its journey toward becoming the final language of value was a long road of longing, fear, obsession, and sometimes blood. Tonight, we begin moments before humans understood any of this. Imagine a world where artificial light did not exist, where darkness was truly darkness, and everything was seen through fire. In that world, prehistoric humans saw gold for the first time, not in treasure chests, but in pebbles polished smooth by water. Its glow wasn't strong, but it endured. It didn't dim in flames, didn't warp, didn't rust. A patient kind of light. That is why we call it a light that does not die. The myths of gold, of immortality, of gods, all came from a very human feeling, wonder. That wonder later became greed, then worship, then thousands of years of competition to possess it. But in the beginning, it was nothing more than a simple question. Why is this thing unlike anything else on Earth? Listen to the sound of the night stream. Picture footsteps on wet gravel. Imagine two rough hands picking up the very first piece of gold. It had no economic value. It could buy nothing, save no one. But it had one quality no rock, no tree, no creature possessed. It refused to die. And that made humans shiver. While most things decayed, broke, or disappeared, gold remained unchanged, unmoving, cold, silent. That immutability made ancient people think it came from another world, not from the earth, but from the sky, from the gods. In the firelight of one early night, when prehistoric people gathered around a burning heap of wood waiting for sunrise, the gold nugget in their hands reflected the red glow of the coals. It did not boil, did not burn, did not blacken. It simply sat there, shining like a small eye watching humanity, as if it already knew that one day people would do anything for it. Worship, build temples, bargain, steal, kill. If you pay attention, every great story in history begins with a very small moment, a seed, a spark, a curiosity. Gold followed the same path. In the prehistoric forest, a tiny nugget in a human palm triggered a psychological chain reaction lasting thousands of years. Desire because it was beautiful, longing because it was rare, reverence because it was unchanging. Those feelings would follow humankind forever. But before it became money, before it became heavy bars locked in central bank vaults, gold was simply a secret hidden in the night fire, in the sound of insects, in the warm breath of a tribe huddled together to survive winter. Here is something fascinating. Archaeologists find gold in many early cultures: Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient Turkey, the Indus Valley, and all of them discovered gold very early. But strangely, they didn't discover it usefully. No one used gold to make knives. No one made tools out of it. They simply kept it, the way one keeps a mystery. This tells us humanity's reaction to gold was never rational. It was instinct. Notice how we still react to light, candlelight, moonlight, reflections on water. Gold is a kind of light you can touch, a fragment of the sun that never goes out, held in your hand. And from that moment, a strange relationship formed between humans and this metal. The relationship between mortal beings and something immortal. Tonight, as you lie down, you may feel your breath slow, your heartbeat softens. But in this story, gold never sleeps. It has existed since Earth had no trees. It has watched humanity appear, grow, fight, love, die, and return again. It has passed through billions of hands, yet it has never aged. And when you are ready to slip into the next part, we will go to the first moment in history when humans encountered gold by accident and fate. Tonight, we return to a moment that no document records, no civilization remembers, yet all of them once lived through. The moment humanity touched gold for the very first time. Imagine a thin stream weaving through a primordial forest. No mechanical sounds, no lantern reflections, only water gliding over stone and the distant calls of wild animals. People of that age lived with earth, with wind, with the fragile things that lay between survival and death. A successful hunt meant the whole tribe would eat. Losing a trail the next day could mean despair. And then, on an afternoon longer than usual, as the sun tilted low and the water began to glow with its color, they saw it. A tiny speck, bright as a small eye, opening beneath the stream. It was not fire, yet it glowed as if holding a piece of fire. Not stone, yet it refused to break like stone. Not a tree, yet it did not die like a tree. When rough hands touched it, the first feeling was not greed, because greed did not yet exist, but strangeness, something that held its color, did not rust, did not tremble before flame, did not yield to time. At that moment, humans had no name for it, no word for gold, no concept of precious metal, no written language to describe it. But they knew one thing. This thing was different. When night fell and the tribe gathered around the fire, the gold bead reflected the ember's red glow as if stirring on its own. It did not move, yet its light gave the impression of slow breathing. Amid the crackle of burning wood, the eyes of the prehistoric people never left that tiny object. They passed it from hand to hand like a question no one could answer. Where did it come from? Why did it not fear fire? Why was it so beautiful? Why did it outlive everything else? From very early on, humans assigned extraordinary meaning to whatever did not change. Everything in their lives changed. They feared aging, disease, and bad harvests. They saw fire die, trees wither, animals rot, and rocks erode. But gold did not. It existed like a reminder that some things stood beyond decay. Without needing religion, gold was sacred from the moment it appeared. Anthropologists believe this is why gold became the metal of the gods so early, not because it was rare, but because it defied time. When humans looked at gold, they saw both what they feared most and desired most: immortality. In the darkness, in the freezing night, gold was the only light that did not fade, not moonlight, which could vanish behind clouds, not firelight, which dwindled with the wind. Gold carried its own glow, a kind of open eye that remained awake even when the universe slipped into its deepest night. Perhaps it was from those earliest nights that gold entered the human mind, like a living creature. It did not roar like a beast, nor sway like trees, but it waited, patient and silent, a voiceless character that would appear again and again in every great story to come. Listen to the soft wind brushing the surface of the water. Imagine the small hand of a child in the tribe touching the gold bead and looking up at the adults, waiting for an explanation. But the adults did not understand either. They only knew how to keep it. Not to trade, not to buy or sell, not to store. Simply to look at it, to admire it, to wonder. The first gold pieces were strung into necklaces, hung from the neck, fixed to spearheads, and placed inside caves as protective charms. They represented no power, because there were no kings. They represented no wealth, because wealth did not yet exist. They were simply tiny fragments of the sun that helped ancient humans feel less alone in a vast, harsh, unpredictable world. There is an intriguing detail. In many archaeological sites, gold is found mixed with animal bones or jewelry made of teeth and stones. This shows that gold was treated as a talisman, a sacred charm, never as economic property. And this very non-economic nature became the foundation for every story that would follow. Gold began as a mystery, and the earliest civilizations would keep that essence unchanged, using gold to speak with gods, not with merchants. Tonight, as your eyes begin to close, imagine firelight flickering across ancient faces, rough hands lifting the gold bead near the torch. They had no idea that thousands of years later, gold would become the pillar of war, commerce, and central banks. In that moment, they were only looking at a light that had no name. In the next stage of our journey, gold will leave the hands of the earliest hunter-gatherers and enter a world where human imagination begins transforming into mythology. A world where gold becomes more than a lost fragment of the sun. It becomes something eternal, a gift from the gods or a curse for the greedy. Take a slow breath. Let tonight open like a doorway into the ancient world where humans first began to wrap their imagination into mythology, and gold became the material that made such stories possible. As tribes slowly grew into structured communities, as the drums called for harvest, the pounding of grain and the cracking of river ice each spring formed the rhythm of life, humans began to ask larger questions. Why are we born? Why do we die? Why does the sun rise? And why does gold shine as though it holds a fragment of the sky within it? Questions without scientific answers always led humanity to the same place, myth. And gold, with its immutable nature, became the first language of eternity. Let me take you to the lands where human imagination first bloomed into stories that have lasted for millennia. We begin with ancient Greece. In Greek mythology, few things carry symbolic weight like gold. It is not merely beautiful, it is a test, a temptation, something that makes the gods smile and causes humans to lose themselves. The story of King Midas is the perfect example. A king granted the wish that everything he touched would turn to gold. And then he touched bread. It turned to gold. He touched water. It turned to gold. He touched his daughter. She too became gold, transformed into a radiant statue any merchant would revere, but no longer the child who laughed, ran, and wrapped her arms around him. Absolute wealth turned out to be the most delicate curse. This story survived thousands of years not because it was sensational, but because it revealed gold's secret nature. It fulfills desire, but exposes weakness. It rewards and punishes in the same instant. Or consider the golden fleece, the sacred treasure Jason and the Argonauts had to cross seas, monsters, and supernatural trials to obtain. Why gold? Because in that mythological world, gold did not matter, but power did. It was proof that an entire life had not been wasted. But in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, gold took on a different form. Not a curse, not a trial, but the material used to cloak the gods themselves. Offerings made to temples were crafted from gold, not because it was the most beautiful, but because it lasted the longest. People believed the gods deserved what time could not erode, for the gods were immortal too. Inside those small pieces of metal was a simple belief. If we give the gods something eternal, they will grant us strength to overcome the limits of a mortal life. And in ancient Egypt, gold carried a name no one could forget: the flesh of Ra. Let your mind drift into the pale golden light of the desert at dawn. The sound of sand brushing itself, the wind sweeping along the sides of pyramids, the sun slowly lifting above the horizon like a heavy iron door opening. To the Egyptians, that light was not only light, it was life. It was a rebirth. It was proof that death was not the end. For this reason, they believed gold, which reflected that sunlight, was the material of the gods, a substance that neither appeared nor vanished, mirroring the sun's eternal cycle. When we look at the golden masks of the pharaohs, what strikes us is not only the precision of every line, but the sense that it does not belong to this world. Even after thousands of years buried beneath sand, it still gleams. As though wars, collapses, floods, plundering, all happened around it, but gold never flinched. The living perish. Empires destroy one another, but gold, the flesh of Ra, stands untouched. And at this point in history, gold carried one purpose alone: to defy death. That is why pharaohs placed gold in their tombs, not to flaunt wealth, but to build a bridge into the next world. The Greeks used gold to speak of power and temptation. The Mesopotamians used gold to speak with the gods. The Egyptians used gold to challenge death. The same material, yet each civilization laid upon it its own layer of meaning. This reveals an important truth. Gold has never been an inert object. It is a mirror reflecting each era's deepest fear. Mythology used gold as a tool to frame what humans could not bring themselves to say aloud. We fear death, we fear poverty, we fear disappearing, we fear being forgotten. Gold became the symbol that soothed those fears or magnified them. But mythology, however beautiful, is only the beginning. Gold would not remain forever in temples or in stories of gods. Soon, it would leave the world of symbols and step into the real world, where humans touched it not to pray, but to exchange, where gold began to have a price, where each grain of metal became a promise that could pay a soldier's wages, feed a family, or save a city-state. And when gold started shifting from the hands of the dead to the hands of the living, from temples to marketplaces, a new era emerged. The era in which gold became the universal language of value. And let the light in your room dim like morning mist over the desert, where gold is no longer an object of mythology, but an object of death. Tonight, we step into ancient Egypt, not the Egypt of tourism, not pyramids lit by artificial yellow lamps, but the Egypt of hot winds lifting sand into whispers. The Egypt where people believed death was not an ending, but a doorway. And gold was the toll paid for the journey. Through that doorway, walk slowly. Imagine yourself stepping down a cold stone stair, the steps leading into a burial chamber deep underground, the smell of damp limestone, the scent of time, the air of a space sealed for thousands of years. The torchlight has not yet spread across the room, but you already see it. A warm, muted glow like the breath of a small sun buried beneath the earth. It is the mask of a young king, Tutankhamun. People often assume gold in Egypt was used to flaunt wealth. It wasn't. Gold appeared in tombs, not in markets. It was tied more to death than to life. For the Egyptians, gold was not a material for trade, but a language for speaking to the afterlife. Look closely at that mask. It is not just gold. It is a declaration. This king's soul will not be destroyed, not forgotten, not distorted by time. Every line of the mask is an act of defiance against death. Each engraved detail, each hammered sheet of gold, each blue stone set into the eyes. They all say the same thing. This person will live on, somewhere else. When archaeologists opened Tutankhamun's tomb, they were struck silent, not because of the treasure, but because it felt as if they were opening a door to confront humanity's own concept of immortality. In the dim light, the burial goods lining the room spoke in their own voices. Necklaces, rings, amulets, golden chairs, golden cups, a dagger forged from meteoritic iron. Each item told a story about the most primal fear, the fear of being erased from the world. When an Egyptian died, they believed the soul had to cross many trials: the field of reeds, the boat of Ra, the judgment of Osiris, and the monster Ammit. Not everyone could pass, but the gold in the tomb acted like a protective charm, a reminder to the gods that this soul belonged to eternity. No civilization used gold more sacredly than Egypt, not to pay wages, not to trade, not to display in the markets, but to confront the one thing no one escapes: death. Imagine Egyptian artisans working in a dark chamber, trembling oil lamps casting light on thin sheets of gold. They did not believe they were making decorations. They believed they were crafting the material that would help a soul walk into the afterlife with honor. Gold in their hands was not metal. It was a belief, and the most fascinating thing, even as Egyptian dynasties fell, even as Nile floods came and went, even through war, invasion, famine, gold remained underground, waiting to be found. It did not warp, did not decay, was not bitten by time. This steadfastness made gold the perfect vessel for preserving souls. When Egyptians looked at gold, they did not see wealth, they saw immortality. Humans could not possess immortality, so they borrowed it through matter. Picture the final night before a pharaoh was placed in his tomb. The heavy stone door slides shut. The cold air of the tunnel brushes the skin. Workers are placing the final object in its place. A soft tap, then absolute silence. From that moment onward, gold would guard the soul of the dead. And 3,000 years later, when Carter stepped into that chamber, gold stood there, as if it had never left the gaze of the one who carried it into the tomb. Notice this: while other civilizations used gold for exchange or earthly power, Egypt locked its gold underground. They hid everything beneath the earth as if concealing a vast secret. This created a paradox. Egypt had much gold, but it rarely appeared in economic circulation. Gold in Egypt was like a whisper. Life is fragile, but in our hands we carry something immortal. Deep down, this was the first foundation for every belief humanity later attached to gold. It does not change, it does not age, it does not die. And when a thing refuses to die, humans assign it the meaning of life. However, there will come a great moment in history when gold leaves tombs, steps out of temples, and enters the hands of the living. No longer a gift for gods, but a tool humans use to reorganize society itself. That is the moment gold first becomes money. As we step into the next part, the light will shift from tombs to marketplaces, from the world of the dead to the world of the living. Take a soft breath, as if you are stepping out of Egypt's cold burial chambers into the first morning, where sunlight no longer falls on the dead, but on the living, people trading, bargaining, building, exchanging, and taking risks. Because it is at this moment that gold leaves the world of the gods and enters the world of everyday life. Not immediately, not in a year or a generation, but through a long, quiet migration, like a river changing its course over centuries. Imagine another land. Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Lydia, where rivers carried both fertile soil and war in their currents, where people no longer relied only on rituals, but needed something to manage goods, pay soldiers, price harvests, and protect property after every flood. In that world, gold was no longer just for the divine. It began to be weighed, measured, and quantified. Imagine yourself standing in an ancient marketplace. The calls of grain sellers, the braying of donkeys pulling carts, the clang of metal as a blacksmith tests the strength of a blade. And amid that crowd, for the first time in history, something that once lay at the bottom of tombs becomes something to exchange. The Lydians were the first to mint gold coins, a seemingly simple act, but in truth, a silent revolution inside the human mind. For the first time, gold was not the light of death. It was the light by which life operated. A merchant could finally pay a craftsman. A king could finally pay his soldiers. A commoner could save something that would not rot with time. If you look closely, every early economy faced the same problem: inconsistent value. One cow was not equal to 2 baskets of grain. 2 baskets of grain were not equal to a bronze knife. A knife was not all equal to a tunic. Everything depended on the harvest, war, and weather. But gold was stable. It did not mold, did not spoil, did not lose weight, did not change its nature, and because it was stable, it became the anchor for every other value. The hands of a mint worker poured droplets of molten gold into stone molds. Round coins emerged, stamped with the lion's head, the symbol of Lydia. The cooling metal made a faint sound, like the first heartbeat of a newborn economy. This was the moment gold became the universal language of value. It did not matter what language you spoke, which gods you worshipped, or where you lived. A Lydian gold coin could buy goods from Greece to Persia. Something once reserved for kings and gods now traveled dusty roads alongside donkeys, oxen, and mercenaries. It became the connective tissue between people who had never met. The most fascinating part is this: gold had no practical use. It cut nothing, built nothing, warmed no one. But through one single trait, its permanence, it became the foundation of all transactions. This was one of humanity's greatest turning points, not the invention of the wheel, not the invention of writing, but the invention of collective belief, because gold coins had value only if everyone agreed they had value. To see the wider picture, from Lydia, gold coins spread across the Mediterranean. Athens used gold to pay its mercenary armies. Persia stored gold in vast treasuries to recruit soldiers across its empire. The earliest trade routes beat with the pulse of gold. All of it began with the decision to mint money. Gold stepped out of the realm of the dead and into the realm of the living, those who traded, fought, dreamed, failed, and built. And from here, gold carried a new essence, the essence of power. Feel this. From the moment gold coins appeared, war would no longer be led merely by honor or faith. It would be led by the need for metal. Later wars, Athens, Persia, Rome, revolved around one axis. Whoever owned the larger gold reserves would command more soldiers, more ships, more mercenaries. Gold was no longer the property of the sky, none of the gods, none of the dead, but of the living. And the living always want more. Something that once lay motionless in tombs now became the engine of society. And when society runs on gold, war changes its nature, because war would no longer be just the fall of a city. It would be the transfer of gold from the defeated to the victorious. You will see this clearly in the next part, when Athens, Persia, and the entire ancient world begin to calculate war by the weight of gold. Let your breath slow, like the rhythm of an ancient ship cutting through Mediterranean waves beneath the moon. Because from here, gold's story is no longer a story of markets or minting halls. It steps into the battlefield. And when gold enters war, everything changes. Let me take you first to Athens, not the Athens of moderns, tourism, but the Athens of the years before the Persian Wars. A city loud with potters, merchants, philosophers, yet filled with an unspoken fear, the fear of being swallowed by the Persian Empire. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows a great war is approaching. And inside Athens's treasuries, in cold stone chambers carefully sealed, lies the thing the city pins its survival on: gold. An Athenian official lifts a gold ingot, balances it on a tiny scale, and writes on a wooden tablet the amount allocated for the triremes, the three-tiered warships. Without gold, they cannot pay the rowers. Without rowers, Athens loses not only its navy, but its democracy, its sovereignty. This is a pivotal moment in history. The first time humanity realizes that gold can be transformed into military power. Because gold can buy food, weapons, pine wood for shipbuilding, and steel for forging spears. And most importantly, Gold can pay soldiers. A democracy like Athens, unlike Persia, does not have vast populations to pull troops from. They must pay citizens to fight. Gold is the tool that turns fear into loyalty. Let the sound of oars hitting water echo in your mind. Hundreds of ships move like a school of metal fish. Each trireme is gold crystallized into force. Now look east. Persia, an empire so vast the sun rose in one place and set in another while remaining within its borders. The Persian treasury was not Athens' treasury. It was larger, deeper, more terrifying. In the palace of Persepolis, hundreds of gold bars were stacked into walls. Tributes from Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, and India piled into mountains of gold. Wherever the Persian army marched, gold marched with it, buying mercenaries, food supplies, and war horses. When Persia invaded Greece, it did not bring mythology. They brought gold. And gold buys war. How did Athens resist the greatest empire in the world? With gold, but less of it, lighter, more expensive. Yet they had something Persia lacked, the will of people defending their own soil. At Salamis, Athenian triremes maneuvered within narrow waters, creating traps that disoriented the vast Persian fleet. But here's the truth, seldom spoken. Without gold, those ships would not exist, those rowers would not row, and that victory would never have happened. Gold, silently, determined the fate of an entire civilization. Now move to another moment, the moment that wove gold into the history of war forever. When Persia fell, its immense treasury was divided among the Greek city-states. The Greeks didn't just win the war, they won a treasury. This revealed the true nature of ancient warfare. It was the transfer of gold from the defeated to the victorious. Honor was only the surface. Politics was only the excuse. Gold was the fuel. Imagine the night after victory, the city quiet, Greek soldiers carrying heavy chests of gold along stone streets. No cheering, only the creak of wheels and the breaths of men carrying the weight of a fallen empire on their shoulders. They knew this gold would feed Athens for generations, would build walls, would fund armies, would raise monuments that today we call wonders. And then, from Athens to Sparta, from Sparta to Macedonia, gold became the measure of national strength. Everything that followed, from Alexander the Great to Rome, rested on this premise. War cannot happen without gold. Picture a group of Greek mercenaries in a Persian camp receiving gold coins to fight for whoever paid more. They were not loyal to an empire. They were loyal to gold. This leads to an insight few notice. Gold did not just feed armies. It created a new military class, mercenaries, who fought not for ideals, but for money. And when people fight for gold, war becomes more dangerous, more persistent, harder to predict. Feel this slow burn moment. Night wind drifting across an empty battlefield, lifting dust from broken jewelry. No one speaks, but everyone understands. This war is not over, because gold remains. And when gold remains, war has reason to continue. But after Greece's golden age fades, another empire inherits gold's legacy and elevates it to a new scale. Rome, a world where gold becomes the illusion of invincibility, where an empire uses gold to deceive its own people, where weakness is hidden beneath the brilliant shine of the aureus coin. And that is when gold becomes the most dangerous thing of all, not merely a metal, but a tool for hiding truth, an empire convinced it could never fall. Tonight, we step into Rome. Not the glamorous Rome of cinema, but the real Rome, the Appian Way, thick with dust and hoofbeats, the smell of forged iron drifting from workshops, and the aureus coins gleaming like fragments of the sun hammered into money. Imagine yourself standing in the Forum, the heart of Rome. Around you are the squeaks of wooden cartwheels, the stomping of guards, and the cries of merchants. And in the midst of that organized chaos lies a small object that determines the fate of an empire, the aureus, a round coin of pure gold stamped with the face of Caesar. Its shine is not just for beauty, it is a declaration. Rome is invincible. A Greek merchant holds an aureus for the first time. It is heavy, solid, and burning like a small flame. In that moment, he knows he is not holding money. He is holding power. Rome understood something that earlier civilizations only brushed against. Gold does not merely purchase power. Gold is power. Rome's victories, from Gaul to Egypt, flowed back to the capital like blood to the heart. Spoils, temple treasures, jewelry, and golden statues from conquered lands were melted down into aurei to feed the largest military machine of the ancient world. Rome expanded by sword, but maintained its empire by gold. Caravans loaded with gold from Caesar's Gallic campaigns rumbled into Rome. The crowd cheered. The victor walked in triumph. And in that very moment, something dangerous took root, the belief that Rome could not lose. Gold became a symbol of invincibility. But this symbol was an illusion, because when an empire believes it cannot fall, it begins to hide its cracks. Feel a still moment. In a dark chamber of the Roman treasury, officials balance a melting pot. A small amount of pure gold is mixed with silver, then with copper, then with other metals, a little each time, a little more with each emperor. Roman emperors could not fight endless wars forever to feed their treasury with real gold. But they needed gold to pay soldiers, feed the bureaucracy, and secure the loyalty of the legions. And when pure gold was not enough, they created fake gold. Not fake in the sense of cheap plating, fake in the sense of debasement, reducing the gold content of the aureus. From 8 grams of pure gold, the aureus fell to 7 grams, then 6.8, then 6.5, but the surface still gleamed, still beautiful, still bearing Caesar's face. For the first time in history, gold was used to lie. A Roman veteran in 110 BC holds an aureus and feels it lighter than the one he received in his youth. But he says nothing, because he knows when money is diluted, it means the empire is growing weak. Sometimes decline does not begin with the sound of swords. It begins with the changing weight of a coin. Rome continued conquering. Great victories still came. Golden statues still rose in the squares, but in the dark rooms of the treasury, truth was being cut apart, melted down, diluted. And here lies the crucial insight. Gold never lies. But humans use gold to hide the truth. Let me bring you into another slow, quiet moment. You stand inside Rome's treasury, torchlight glinting on heavy chests. The treasurer opens a box, and inside are no longer pure gold coins. There are thousands of coins, beautiful on the outside but hollow within, a perfect metaphor for a weakening empire no one wants to acknowledge. That was Rome's tragedy. Not a lack of gold, but the illusion of gold. Because when gold becomes the symbol of invincibility, people stop looking at reality. An exhausted army, fractured borders, empty coffers, impoverished farmers, and corruption blooming in distant provinces. Gold coats everything like a glossy varnish. But varnish cannot save a wall when termites are already eating it from within. Listen to the soft sounds of night, banners fluttering on Palatine Hill, guards tapping spears on stone, the clinking of aureus coins in an official's pouch. These small sounds mark a significant shift. The greatest empire is aging. Rome will not fall immediately, but from the moment its gold was debased, its fate was sealed. And as the Western Empire sinks slowly into twilight, gold, like a creature that knows how to move, begins to change direction. It flows into temples, churches, and relics, no longer the light of Caesar, but the light of God. That will be the next world. A poor, dim medieval Europe where gold becomes the only supernatural light in everyday life. Let the light in your room narrow, shrinking into a thin ribbon like the flicker of candles inside a medieval European church. Because from here, gold enters a new space, no longer the symbol of empire, but the symbol of faith. When Rome fell apart, stone roads cracked, expeditionary armies dissolved, cities abandoned, one thing kept moving: gold. It no longer flowed toward Rome, it flowed toward the churches. Imagine yourself standing inside a small church in 6th century Italy. Outside are hunger, disease, peasants in coarse wool, and muddy streets. But inside, once the heavy wooden door closes, the world changes. A warm, soft gold glows from chalices, altars, and carefully carved crucifixes. The outside world is dark. But in the church, gold becomes a supernatural kind of light. A goldsmith leans over a thin sheet of gold, breathing gently so he does not disturb the pattern he is engraving. Each stroke is not for decoration, but to sheath an invisible authority, the authority of God. In a world where people cannot read, cannot understand Scripture, do not know politics or mathematics, they understand only one thing: whatever shines inside the church belongs to God. And if God stands with someone, that person wins. Here is an important insight. Gold in the medieval era was not just an asset. It was a psychological instrument. It was how the church governed the fears of the masses. Across Europe, from France to Germany, from England to Hungary, gold accumulated inside churches of every size. Not a few ornaments, but real treasure. Golden chalices, reliquaries, jewel-encrusted bishops' crowns, mosaics covered in gold leaf reflecting candlelight like a burning sky. The world outside was poor, dark, and hungry, but the church glowed, and it glowed with gold. This contrast gave gold a supernatural meaning. When people knelt before a golden mosaic, they felt they were looking into the divine. When they touched a golden reliquary, they believed miracles were real. When they heard golden bells, they believed their prayers rose to heaven. In a darkness that lasted centuries, gold preserved faith and power. But the church was not the only one using gold. The Holy Roman Empire, a name heavy with the ambition to resurrect old Roman glory, wrapped itself in gold to claim legitimacy. Picture the coronation of Emperor Charlemagne. A golden crown, a cloak embroidered with gold thread, and a golden cross resting on his knee. Each object was not a mere ornament. It was a political declaration, because in the medieval world, to rule a land, you had to prove you were chosen by God. And gold was the most visible proof of that divine selection. Charlemagne's hand grips the ceremonial sword, gold glinting along its hilt. Monks bow in long rows at his feet. Above, candlelight strikes a saint's icon edged in gold, a perfect choreography of power, religion, and politics fused in a single metallic shine. But do not forget, this was not a wealthy era. There was no global trade. There were no treasuries like Rome's. So why did churches have so much gold? The answer lies in a habit that lasted centuries: donation. People believed giving gold to the church bought them a place in heaven. If you wanted your father's soul forgiven, you donated gold. If you wanted your child cured, you donated gold. If you wanted better harvests, you donated gold. In a world of cold, disease, and instability, a small hope was enough for people to give everything they had. The church, fully aware of this, became the largest gold-holding institution in Europe. From that point on, gold gained a new layer of meaning. Not the light of empire, not the light of ancient temples, but the light of salvation. The irony is, gold in the church saved no one from poverty. It saved only the church's power. Imagine a winter night in 10th century northern Germany, wind rattling crooked wooden roofs, children coughing in the cold, the smell of damp coal. But a mile away stands a great stone church with bronze doors and flickering golden candlelight. People looked at that glow and thought God was there. But in truth, gold was there. All of this reveals one crucial truth: gold adapts to whichever system holds the most power in its era. In Egypt, it served death. In Lydia, it served trade. In Athens and Persia, it served in war. In Rome, it served illusions of invincibility. And in medieval Europe, it became the light of faith. But the world would soon expand. Trade routes would stretch from Baghdad to Chang'an. Caravans would carry gold across deserts, over snowy peaks, through empires. Gold would leave the church and enter a larger world, where it became a universal language across thousands of miles and dozens of cultures. Let your mind slip away from Europe's cold stone churches and step into a wider world, where trade routes stretch like the earth's veins and gold flows through them like an invisible bloodstream. The medieval world was not only Europe's darkness. Beyond it, a vast network thrived. Bustling Baghdad, wealthy Delhi, radiant Samarkand, and Chang'an, prosperous like the beating heart of the East. In each of these places, gold did not blaze like in European churches, but appeared in a quieter, deeper form, the final unit for measuring trust. Imagine yourself walking into a marketplace in Abbasid Baghdad. The air is thick with resin, spices, wool, and tanned leather. On one rack hang rolls of Chinese silk, bags of pepper from Kerala, bars of silver from Iran, and among them, small packets of gold wrapped in cloth. Not much, not ostentatious, yet everyone knows they hold absolute value. Muslims, from desert caravans to merchants at the port of Basra, never treated gold as the only currency. They used silver more. Some regions preferred copper. But when transactions grew large, when accounts needed settling, when ultimate trust had to be confirmed, everything returned to gold. Gold in the Islamic world was like an unspoken oath. When you received gold, it meant you trusted the one who paid. Now, look to the Indian subcontinent. If Europe stored gold in churches, then India wore gold on the body. Here, gold was the language of family, love, and prosperity. A bride entered her wedding cloaked in gold across her neck, arms, and ankles, not to flaunt wealth, but to protect herself. Gold was the most private, concealable, dependable asset in a society filled with uncertainty. An Indian folk saying goes, "A woman's true wealth is the gold she wears," not a metaphor, a survival mechanism. At the ports of Gujarat, gold moved like breath itself. Arab, Persian, and East African Muslim traders brought spices, sandalwood, and ivory and took away gold. No arguments needed. One small piece of gold made every agreement clear. Then gold's journey continued east. Picture caravans along the Silk Road, camels in long lines over stone paths, cold winds sweeping the Iranian plateau, the strong scent of Chinese tea drifting from every rest station. They carried silk, tea, paper, lacquerware, and received gold in major markets. In China, gold was not the chief currency. Silver was the system's lifeblood. But whenever silver ran short, whenever the court needed to steady belief, gold instantly became the anchor. A single gold bar could save a family from bankruptcy, buy safety, purchase loyalty, or secure a moment of peace in times of chaos. The scariest thing about gold is not its shine, but its silence. It stands behind every major transaction without saying a word. It is rarely the first currency, but always the last refuge when all others fail. In Samarkand, crossroads of the world, gold passed through the hands of people who spoke entirely different languages: Turks, Persians, Sogdians, Chinese, Arabs. They could not speak to one another, but they understood gold. No common law, no shared judge, no treaty needed. Just one piece of gold, and communication between civilizations was established. Close your eyes for a moment, and you might hear the soft footsteps of caravans traveling by night to avoid bandits. Beneath their robes, not swords, but small cloth bundles of gold, the easiest thing to hide, trade, and preserve across journeys of thousands of kilometers. One interesting detail: historians call gold in this era the final unit of trust, not because it was the most precious metal, but because it was the most stable in a world full of turmoil. Empires rose and fell, dynasties flourished, then vanished, religions spread, then fractured, but gold remained itself, unaffected by time, unaffected by rain or wind, unaffected by fire and war. It moved across lands like a silent character constantly in motion, from Baghdad to Delhi, from Delhi to Kashgar, from Kashgar to Chang'an, from Chang'an to Kyoto, then back by sea to the Indian Ocean, a massive loop that no map fully captures. Muslims did not call gold the metal of Ra. Indians did not call it the curse of Midas. The Chinese did not see it as Rome did, but they all used gold in the same way, as something beyond doubt. Gold gained a new shade here, no longer tied to one religion, one empire, or one civilization. It became a cross-border language, and soon a single moment would shake the entire Mediterranean, not because of war, not because of philosophy, but because of one man from West Africa carrying so much gold that he disrupted the economy of an entire region. Tonight, let your mind drift down toward West Africa, where the Sahara stretches endlessly and dunes move like a giant ocean of gold. There, a kingdom rarely mentioned in history performed a single act that made the entire Mediterranean shiver like a tightened string. That kingdom was Mali, and that man was Mansa Musa. Imagine a morning in the palace of Timbuktu. Sahara winds sweep across thick adobe walls, carrying the scent of hot, dry dust. Mansa Musa, the 10th king of the Mali Empire, steps onto the terrace, his shadow stretching long across the floor like the outline of a desert deity. But his power does not come from war or intimidation. It comes from gold. Mali, in the 14th century, was one of the richest gold regions on Earth. The mines of Ghana, Bure, and Bambouk pumped out enough precious metal to blind any empire. Then Mansa Musa did something no one of his age anticipated. He decided to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. In the Islamic world, pilgrimage is a sacred obligation, but Mansa Musa did not travel as an ordinary believer. He traveled like a river of gold come alive. Picture this scene. A caravan so long that people said it took an entire day to march past a single viewpoint. Tens of thousands accompany him, slaves carrying gold bars on their backs, camels loaded with sacks of gold dust, clothes embroidered with gold thread, officials carrying golden staffs to lean on in the sand. Everything shimmered like a burst of sunlight across the desert. Arab historians described the procession with equal awe and dread. No one has ever passed through Cairo with such wealth. And Cairo was where the story twisted. When Mansa Musa entered the city, he did not hide his gold. He gave it away. To merchants, the poor, mosques, scholars, freed slaves, and clerics. His gifts fell across Cairo like pieces of the sun dropping from a king's hands. But there was so much gold that something unimaginable happened. Cairo's economy is destabilized, gold prices collapsed, goods soared in price, monetary reserves were wrecked. A wave of inflation rippled across Egypt, North Africa, and the Mediterranean for years. For the first time in history, gold was not the solution, it was the problem. Merchants in Alexandria sat silent in the marketplace, watching gold prices fall. Venetian and Genoese traders, working along 14th century routes, wrote home warning that a man from West Africa has overturned the market. Europeans who heard the story thought it was a myth. No one believed a black king from Africa could be so wealthy that he could shake the Mediterranean economy. But it wasn't an exaggeration. It was raw truth. Too much gold can be as dangerous as too little. Listen to this in a whispering tone. Gold, supposedly the anchor of stability, can become the seed of chaos when it floods the wrong place at the wrong time. Mansa Musa continued his hajj, giving gold everywhere he went. His caravan stretched across the sand, sunlight glinting off thousands of gold bars until it looked like a massive serpent of metal crawling through the desert. When he returned to Mali, he brought back scholars, architects, and merchants. He turned Timbuktu into Africa's greatest center of learning. Sankore University rose. The Timbuktu Library held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. The empire entered its golden age, literally and figuratively. But the echo of his pilgrimage spread across the Islamic world and the Mediterranean. Gold can enrich, but gold can also destroy. A crucial insight from this chapter. In history, gold is rarely neutral. It amplifies everything: prosperity or chaos, trust or panic, stability or inflation. And the shock Mansa Musa created forced many empires to confront a question never asked before. Could gold be a force that changes the world? That question would grow into a storm centuries later, when Europe realized that far beyond its seas was another continent filled with enough gold to redraw the map of the world. The first winds of the age of exploration were rising. Wooden ships are prepared to set sail, and humanity was about to begin the greatest gold hunt in history. Let the darkness in your room settle like the night falling over the 15th century ocean, where small wooden ships prepared to do what no one in Europe had ever imagined: cross the sea in pursuit of a rumor about gold. Because 1492 was not just the year Columbus discovered America. It was the year Europe discovered that the world itself could be reforged by gold, a new map, a new balance of power, a new world order. All of it began with a quiet desperation inside the royal courts of Europe. Picture the Spanish court before Columbus, finances drained after generations of reconquista. The treasury is empty like a house after a fire. The king and queen stared at trade maps, knowing they were locked outside the wealthy networks controlled by Arabs and the Venetians. Spices cost more than gold. Taxes were not enough. The future was bleak. Then came a man with a mad idea: sail west to reach the east, sail into what Europeans believed was the edge of the world, infested with sea monsters. Columbus did not sell Queen Isabella on an expedition. He sold her a dream, lands overflowing with gold beyond imagination. He spoke of Chipango, Japan, with golden palaces. He spoke of Cathay, China, with bottomless treasure. He claimed that if Spain obtained that gold, not only could it save itself, it could dominate Christendom. And in a moment of risk mixed with hope, Isabella agreed. Not because she trusted Columbus, but because she trusted gold. Listen to the waves on an August night in 1492. 3 small ships, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, leaving the port of Palos. No one knew if they would return. No one knew what lay ahead. There was only one glittering motive in their minds: gold. Columbus did not find Asia. He found a new continent. And though at first he was disappointed by the apparent poverty of the Caribbean islands, within months he saw the one thing he needed: small gold ornaments on the wrists of the indigenous people. In that moment, history turned. Columbus asked, "Where is the gold?" The locals pointed west, south, toward lands named softly like the wind. No one gave details, but it was enough. For Columbus, that tiny ornament was louder than any map. The Americas had gold, and if they had gold, they were worth conquering. When Columbus returned to Spain, he was celebrated as a man who brought news from heaven, not because he discovered a continent, but because he found traces of gold. From that point, Europeans flooded across the sea, conquistadors carrying crosses, matchlock guns, and bottomless hunger. Cortés went to Mexico, Pizarro to Peru, Balboa crossed Panama, and gazed upon the Pacific. But what united them was not glory or ideals. It was the rumor of El Dorado, the golden city where people supposedly dusted themselves with gold every morning. El Dorado did not exist, But greed did. Expeditions plunged into jungles, dying by the thousands from disease, beasts, and exhaustion. What kept them going, against all reason, was one simple truth. Whoever found gold could remake the world, and many did. When the Spanish conquered Tenochtitlan, they not only destroyed the Aztec Empire, but also they melted every piece of native gold, idols, masks, ornaments, into bars. In the stone vaults of Seville, the sound of gold melting flowed like the sigh of a civilization being stripped of its soul. A Spanish officer once wrote, "The natives ask why we desire gold. I tell them, we have a sickness only gold can cure." That sentence is the rawest confession of the age of exploration. From here, gold stopped being merely precious. It became the engine of conquest, officially for spreading faith, but truly for expanding royal treasuries. Feel this in the slow breath of night. Gold turned the Americas into history's most brutal laboratory. It created new trade routes. It turned Spain into a superpower. It caused millions of deaths through disease, guns, slavery, and greed. And the greatest paradox was this: gold became the official justification for killing in the name of civilization. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, Spanish ships loaded with gold, silver, and treasure from the Americas crossed the Atlantic like storms of metal. Europe trembled under the weight of sudden wealth. The balance of power shifted. World maps were redrawn. Old empires faded. New maritime nations rose. But what sailed from the west was not just gold. It carried within it the darkness of a world Europe had never seen. Mountains gutted from within, mines deep as hell, workers dying in tens of thousands for a metal Europeans believed was a gift from God. This is the story of Potosi, the mountain that devoured human lives, coated in silver and gold. Let your breath blend with the thin, icy air of the Andes, where mountains rise like bony fingers scratching the sky. There stands a mountain once hailed as a gift from heaven. But for those who entered its depths, it was no gift. It was a sentence. Its name was Potosi. In the 16th century, Potosi was what impoverished Europeans called in two trembling words, the Mountain of Gold. But the truth was far more horrifying. Beneath its gray rock and thin snow, there wasn't only gold. There was silver. So much silver that the Spanish believed they could build a bridge of solid silver from Potosi to Madrid and still have metal left. And they tried. Imagine the conquistadors seeing Potosi for the first time. The cold cuts like a blade. The thin air turns every breath into a fragile thread, pulling into the lungs. But the shine of exposed silver ore under the sun glints like steel. In that moment, they knew the fate of the Spanish Empire would be decided there. But Potosi was not for the Spaniards. Potosi was for others, those who would descend into its belly and never return. Indigenous Andeans were forced into labor under the Mita system. They were dragged to altitudes above 4,000 meters, where even standing was a challenge, let alone working. The mines were deep, dark, cold, and suffocating. People said, "Going down into Potosi is like entering the mouth of a hungry beast. Let your mind descend into one of those tunnels, not with your eyes, with your senses, the smell of metal mixed with rock dust, the echo of pickaxes striking stone, the ragged breathing of miners pulling heavy ore carts with their own weight, cold that slices skin, darkness so dense that only the trembling flame of oil lamps keeps panic away." This was not a place humans were meant to live. It was a place humans were sent to die on behalf of an empire across the ocean. Historians estimate millions of indigenous people died inside this mountain, not by swords, but by falling rocks, exhaustion, lungs filling with mineral dust, or mercury poisoning used in refining silver. If there is one place in the early modern world where gold and silver were washed with blood, it is Potosi. In the refining chambers, mercury was poured into troughs to separate silver from stone. Drops of mercury spilled over hands, soaked into skin, laced the air. People had no knowledge of its toxicity. They only knew that some of them didn't wake up each morning. In the damp quarters of the mine managers, bags of silver were weighed and stamped, then transported to the port of Arica. From there, they crossed the Pacific to Manila along the famous Galleon Road, then from Manila to Mexico, from Mexico back to Seville. A global loop of precious metal and a loop of suffering. Notice this: Spain did not merely extract silver from Potosi, they drained it, to the point where Europe's economy depended on it. Wars, palaces, armies, all fueled by the metal flowing from Potosi's veins. But every bar of silver shipped across the sea was a life left behind. A monk, Bartolomé de las Casas, wrote, "At Potosi, for every bar of silver raised, know that 10 souls are buried." It wasn't a metaphor, it was a factual description. You can almost hear the wind scraping across the slopes, like someone whispering across centuries. Why do we die for the wealth of others? But for Spain, everything was just numbers. How much silver shipped, how many wars have been funded, how many palaces built, how many kings crowned with gold. Potosi became the beating heart of the global economy. If that heart stopped, Spain would collapse. If it kept beating, tens of thousands more would die. This was the paradox of gold and silver in that age. It enriched those far away and impoverished those closest. As precious metals flooded Europe, prices soared. A century-long inflation swept across the continent. Kings financed wars with silver and cemented their power. But in Potosi itself, the only thing that rose was the death toll. And here lies the most important truth of this chapter. Gold had once been the light of gods, the light of empires, the light of faith. But at Potosi, gold and silver became the light of a machine built to grind human beings. Potosi was where gold lost its myth. It became a commodity purchased with blood. When you close your eyes, let the final image be that mountain under cold moonlight, silent, unmoving, yet still echoing with pickaxes, gasps for air, prayers, and the silence of those who never returned. But the story does not end here, because as metal poured from the Americas into Europe, the old world would plunge into a gold fever unlike anything seen before. Prices rising, wars igniting, royal dynasties pulled into a metallic whirlpool they could no longer control. Let your mind slip away from the freezing mines of Potosi, cross the ocean, and drift toward Europe, where bars of silver and gold from the New World arrived like metallic waves, dazzling and dangerous. When the first fleets returned to Seville, loaded with American silver, people flooded the port as if celebrating a festival. Heavy chests were dragged down gangplanks, and the glitter reflected on the waters of the Guadalquivir like a sheet of white fire. No one knew that this beautiful light was carrying an invisible nightmare. To 16th century Europe, gold and silver from the Americas were God's gifts. Proof, they believed, that they were destined to rule the world. But beneath the joy lay a truth few dared imagine. Too much gold can destroy an economy. Picture a shoemaker in Madrid. One day, customers began paying more silver for shoes that used to cost only a few coins. The shoemaker is delighted. The next day, the price of bread rises. Then the price of cloth. Then the price of timber. No one understands. But the prices keep climbing steadily, like floodwater rising after a storm. This was the century-long inflation known as the price revolution. The flood of silver from the New World was so immense that Europe's currency simply became cheaper. Not because kings printed more coins, not because of war, but because of an overwhelming surplus of precious metal. The paradox shattered everything. The rich grew richer, the poor sank deeper, and royal courts became addicted to metal like addicts to opium. They believed gold and silver could fix everything, short of funds. Take silver from Mexico, want a war? Take silver from Peru, want a palace? Take silver from Potosi. And so, in the royal courts of Europe, every plan was measured by metal, as if gold and silver could solve any human problem. But war was an addict too. Imagine a night in the Spanish court. King Philip II sits before maps strewn across a table. Every border is a threat. Every army is a machine fueled by money. Every ship is a hungry mouth demanding costs. Outside, the people suffer as prices rise. Inside, the court sees only one thing: silver from the Americas. And so wars were declared with blind confidence. Conflicts in the Netherlands, England, Italy, and elsewhere erupted one after another. Spain believed that as long as it had silver, it could defeat anyone. But silver cannot buy a strategy, cannot buy loyalty, cannot buy stability. As Potosi pumped out metal, royal courts poured it into war like pouring wine into the mouth of a drunkard. Meanwhile, across Europe, prices continued to soar. Imagine a mother buying flour in Seville. Yesterday, one price. Today, another. No one knew why. No one realized the source of the instability was half a world away, in mines where people were dying by the thousands. And then came a story rarely told. When Spain became too rich in silver, other nations began using Spain's own silver against it. England, the Netherlands, and France, they bought guns, ships, and mercenaries with Spanish silver. An empire was unwittingly financing its own enemies. It was one of the cruelest paradoxes of the age. Gold and silver, thought to be assets, became burdens. Let your mind return briefly to Potosi, where indigenous people died so Spain could grow strong. Yet once the silver reached Europe, it began eroding Spain from within. A distorted economy, parasitic nobility, stagnant industry, rising debt. Spain became a metal empire, and the metal became its chains. And this leads to an essential insight. Gold and silver do not always make empires strong. Sometimes they weaken them because people begin trusting metal more than their own labor. While Spain and Europe drowned in metal from the Americas, a quiet revolution began to take shape. People started asking, do we really need this much gold to run the world? A small group of merchants and treasurers realized something radical. You do not need to possess real gold. You only need to possess trust in gold. And from that strange question, a new invention emerged, one that would shift the axis of global finance, the bank. Gold no longer needed to be abundant. All it needed was paper and the word trust. Let your mind grow still, like a small room with the windows shut, where the only sound is the soft rustle of pages turning in an old notebook. Because from here, the story of gold shifts away from noisy mines, chaotic battlefields, and glittering palaces into a much quieter place, the counter of a goldsmith. This is where gold stops being metal and begins becoming an idea. Picture 17th century Europe. Damp cobblestone streets, crooked-roofed houses leaning into each other, merchants walking with heavy purses at their belts, gold, silver, sometimes gemstones. And with those heavy purses came fear, fear of being robbed, fear of losing everything, fear of unfair trade. In that world, one profession rose to prominence, the goldsmith. But goldsmiths did not only craft jewelry, they kept the gold safe. People deposited gold with them because their shops had thick walls, solid locks, and sometimes even armed guards. When someone deposited gold, they received a slip of paper, a receipt stating how much gold they owned in the vault. And then, something strange happened. One day, someone returned to the shop not to withdraw gold, but to hand that slip of paper to someone else, because that paper, if accepted by both parties, had the same value as the gold locked inside the vault. No one expected that a piece of paper as light as a sigh could carry the weight of a bar of gold heavy enough to bruise a hand. The goldsmiths watched this carefully, and they discovered a great secret. People who deposited gold rarely came to withdraw it at the same time. The gold lay still in the vault, while the papers representing that gold traveled across the city. In that moment, as delicate as a dust mote drifting across sunlight, they realized they didn't need to hold 100% of the gold to issue receipts. They only needed enough gold for the few who might come to withdraw. The rest, they could issue more. Paper. Paper was not gold, but everyone treated it like gold. A financial magic had just been born. Fractional reserve. If Rome once diluted its gold to hide its weakness, Europeans were now diluting the idea of gold. But unlike Rome, this dilution did not collapse an empire. It expanded the world. The receipts became money, not because they were made of gold, but because they promised that somewhere gold existed. And the world began constructing a shared illusion built on one word: trust. Imagine a Dutch merchant. He needs a loan to buy a ship for the East Indies. Previously, he would have needed to gather real gold. But now, all he needs is a slip of paper signed by a bank. That paper could be exchanged for gold, but almost no one ever did. And because of that, banks could create money by simply writing more of it. No hammering, no ore, no miner's sweat, just ink. And the financial world swelled. From London to Amsterdam, Florence to Hamburg, new institutions emerged. Banks. They did not mine gold. They mined trust. But deep in the quiet of their vaults, a question sharp as a blade began to form. What happens if everyone wants their gold at the same time? That question shook the entire system. Because the cold truth was, there wasn't enough gold in the vaults to back every receipt. The strength of banks depended on something that seemed small but was larger than everything else. People had to believe they didn't need to withdraw real gold, a belief sustained by stability. But that stability was built on belief. A closed circle, light as breath, yet supporting the whole modern financial world. Soon, governments stepped in. They realized that if banks could create credit from a fraction of gold, they, with far greater authority, could do the same. And so the first central banks appeared, in England, in the Netherlands, and then elsewhere. Governments began issuing paper money, promising it could be exchanged for gold. Paper became the bridge between the state, merchants, and the people. Gold remained in the vault, silent, unmoving. But the world outside grew livelier than ever because people used paper money whose total value far exceeded the gold sleeping underground. A gentle paradox that shaped the entire modern world. The world does not need much gold to function. It only needs to believe that gold lies somewhere untouched. Perhaps for the first time in its thousands-year journey, gold was no longer just a metal, no longer just a divine symbol, no longer just a war prize or fuel for conquest. It became the invisible foundation of a system, held up by the thinnest sheets of paper. But history would turn once more. Those sheets of paper would not only represent credit, they would ignite something else entirely. A gold rush. Men would leave their homes, cross frozen mountains, driven by rumors glowing like sparks in the dark. With one good strike of the pick, your life will change. Let your mind leave the quiet bank offices where weightless sheets of paper represent tons of gold sleeping in vaults, because from here, the story suddenly reverses. People no longer chase trust written on paper. They return to chasing the raw, ancient metal itself, buried in the earth, and they will chase it to the ends of the world. The 19th century began with a small rumor, and that rumor spread like a spark falling on a dry forest. First in California, then in Australia, then in the Klondike, Alaska. These three would become the greatest gold rushes in human history, and all of them began with the sound of running water. Picture a January morning in 1848. James Marshall, a carpenter, walks along a creek near Sutter's Mill in California. The water is clear, icy enough to numb fingers. He bends down, picks up a tiny pale gold flake. It is soft, it shines, it does not tarnish when rubbed against stone. Marshall freezes. He knows his world, and the world of millions, is about to change. Within months, California was no longer a small blur on a map. It became a summons, a call so irresistible that men across the world abandoned families, fields, shops, boarded ships, wagons, walked through forests and across deserts just to reach a creek where they believed fate could flip with one strike of a pick. Makeshift camps sprouted like mushrooms, canvas tents, rough wooden shacks, barrels turned into walls. At night, the cold cut deep. The wind howled through the Sierra Nevada, and hundreds of campfires glowed like trapped fireflies in the dark. In that firelight, you would hear the same stories over and over. I just need one big nugget, one hit, and I'm rich, just one good shovelful. Nothing is more dangerous than a simple dream, because that simple dream brought muddy roads, streams cold enough to slice skin, hands swollen from frost, and people dying from fever, exhaustion, and hunger. But they still came, and California wasn't the only frenzy. Just a few years later, gold was discovered in Australia. Across Melbourne, Sydney, Ballarat, crowds surged into red-dusted valleys, digging pits, cutting soil, washing ore in flood water. Society trembled, crime soared, housing prices exploded, merchants abandoned shops, craftsmen deserted workshops, and sailors deserted ships to go digging for gold. On some nights, a peaceful town would suddenly empty out, simply because news spread that a rich vein of gold had appeared in the next valley. Then came the Klondike, a place where breath turned to crystals, where snow peaks rose like fortress walls, where winter cold could freeze hope itself. Yet tens of thousands climbed the Chilkoot Pass, a narrow, brutal ascent where each person had to carry a full ton of supplies or be denied passage to avoid dying on the trail. Imagine that scene in the dark, a long line of people, each carrying dozens of kilograms of gear, footsteps pressed into snow, wood creaking, breaths are cut short, the crack of ice beneath boots. No one spoke. There was only one thought: reach the gold. Some died right on the pass. Some abandoned their supplies to survive. Some found real gold. Some lost everything. But all were driven by the same thing, that ancient, undying glow in humanity's imagination. These gold rushes carved deep grooves into the collective psyche. Gold was no longer just a metal. It was a promise that a life, no matter how bleak, could pivot in a single moment. And that promise was more dangerous than any weapon. But like any promise too beautiful, the gold rush had a dark side. Most returned empty-handed. A few grew wealthy. Some lost their lives. And in the end, the biggest winners were not the miners, but the merchants who sold picks, tents, boots, whiskey, and hope. One famous saying emerged from that era: in a gold rush, the man who sells the shovels becomes the richest. And that saying revealed gold's new nature in the 19th century. No longer a mythical treasure, no longer a symbol of the gods, no longer an empire's prize. It became a mass-market dream, a dream millions chased like moths chasing a lamp. But as the world got swept into the roaring current of gold fever, major nations realized something else. To build a stable economy, they could not rely on nuggets accidentally found in streams. They needed a shared rule, a unified standard. And that was when gold entered the iron discipline of the industrial world. The global gold standard. Let your mind drift away from the icy streams where miners once rinsed ore with numb hands, away from the red dusty valleys of Australia and the snowy Klondike passes. Because as the 19th century unfolded, gold was no longer found in wild dreams. It was framed, standardized, and placed on the scale of all humankind. Gold entered an age of iron discipline. The industrial world was rising. Steamships cut across oceans, railways slashed through plains, and telegraph lines stitched continents together. In this vast tapestry, international trade expanded at a speed the world had never seen. Goods moved, capital moved, people moved, but currencies were chaotic. Each nation used a different kind of money with a different value. Some relied on silver, some on gold, some on hope and chance. Cross-border merchants lived in constant uncertainty. No one knew if the money they held today would still hold value tomorrow. Then, a simple, audacious idea emerged. If every nation anchored its currency to one indisputable thing, the world would share a common rule. That indisputable thing was gold. Picture a London morning in 1816. Inside the British Treasury, officials spread a map across the table. Not a map of land, a map of currencies. They wanted the British pound to become the strongest currency in the world. But to do that, they had to end the chaos of unstable money. Their solution was elegant and cold. Each pound sterling would be tied to a fixed amount of gold. 1 pound equal to 113 grains of gold, about 7.3 grams. From that moment, the world stepped into a new order, the gold standard. It was not loud like the gold rush, not tragic like Potosi, not soaked with blood like the conquistadors' era, but its power surpassed them all. The gold standard turned gold into an anchor, preventing every currency from drifting away from reality. Imagine this. A German merchant wants to buy cloth from Britain. A British shipowner wants to pay sailors in pounds. An American investor wants to fund the port of Liverpool. All they needed was the gold exchange table, and they knew exactly what they were dealing with. Amid the turbulence of the 19th century, gold became the only immovable point. But to maintain the gold standard, nations had to obey a brutal discipline. The amount of money issued could not exceed the amount of gold in the vault. Any country that broke this rule was punished by the market. This was why people called it the iron discipline. Gold forced central banks to become strict. Want to print more money? You need gold. Want to increase government spending? You need gold. Want to finance a war? You need gold. No exceptions. For the first time in history, the world shared a unified financial language. From London to New York, from Paris to Berlin, every contract traced back to one thing, a gold bar in a vault. But to keep this system running, nations had to constantly balance the flow of metal. Import too much, and gold flowed out. Export a lot, and gold flowed in. Gold became the heartbeat of the global economy. Merchants, bankers, and politicians monitored gold reserves like doctors checking a patient's pulse. When gold drained too quickly, monetary policy tightened. When gold poured in, credit expanded. It was a delicate financial choreography. One misstep, and an entire economy could stumble. Yet the gold standard had a strange, hypnotic beauty. It made the world appear peacefully stable. Currencies were steady, trade smoothly, cross-border investment is easy, prices predictable. Many historians called the 19th century the Golden Age, not only because economies grew, but because everything seemed to revolve around gold with a calm, steady rhythm. But that balance was fragile. It was like a room kept still only by locking every window, closing out every breeze, blocking every natural shift. All it needed was one strong force from outside, and the system would crack. That force arrived in 1914. When World War II erupted, nations looked at one another in a brief silence. Then, I understood one truth. No nation had enough gold to fight a modern war. They began breaking the iron discipline. They printed money. They suspended gold convertibility. They seized gold from citizens. They banned gold exports. The gold standard, the system that had kept the world stable for nearly a century, shattered like glass under the weight of cannon fire. And from here, gold left the quiet halls of banks and marched back into war. No longer the standard of peace, it became the only thing that could move faster than any army. Let the air in the room thicken slightly, like the early morning fog settling over the battlefields of northern France in 1914. This was the moment when the entire world was about to step into a storm so vast that even those who unleashed it had no understanding of its true destructive power. And when the cannons fired, when troop trains left their stations to the sound of muffled sobs, when the map of Europe began to twist out of shape day by day, gold once again slipped away from bankers, merchants, and politicians. It abandoned the scales, abandoned the contracts, abandoned the rules, and fled toward the safest places human beings could imagine. There is a truth few people realize. When war begins, gold is the thing that runs faster than any army. It outruns tanks, outruns artillery, outruns propaganda, outruns fear. Because war, at its deepest level, is a race to see which nation can keep its heartbeat alive the longest. And that heartbeat is gold. Picture a morning inside the Bank of England in 1914. Officials understood that if they continued abiding by the gold standard, they would never have enough gold to fund a modern war. In a decision made within minutes, one that would reshape the world, they suspended the convertibility of the British pound into gold. From that moment on, paper money no longer rested on iron discipline. It rested on hope. Hope that after the war, everything could be restored. But everyone understood that such restoration would never fully come. Across Europe, banks and treasuries did the same. Vaults were sealed, gold bars locked away in cold, silent darkness, like metal fragments of each nation's heart that no one dared to touch. Gold became the backup heart of the state, not to be used, but to be kept. Because if gold ran out, the war was over. No weapon on earth could change that. Shift the scene slightly. In Berlin, people crowded outside banks, terrified their paper money would lose value. They wanted gold, but the gold had already been moved, quietly, secretly, into deeper vaults. Meanwhile, in New York, the United States, still outside the conflict, became the world's safe deposit box. European nations shipped their gold to America to pay for weapons, food, trucks, and gunpowder. The port of New York glowed at night with the movement of sealed gold crates under heavy guard. No bullet ever struck the gold. But every bullet was bought with gold. Then the war spread like an oil slick across the water. Russia collapsed, Germany withered, Austria-Hungary broke apart, France bled nearly to death. Only gold, the silent metal, remained. Entirely unchanged, unmoved by the rotting world around it. By the end of World War I, gold was no longer something used to value money. It was something used to survive. And then World War II arrived like a second storm, larger, stronger, far more catastrophic. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, the first thing they seized was not the town hall, not the radio station, not the railway station. It was the gold reserves. The German army had a precise strategy. Advance quickly, seize the treasury, take the gold, and use that gold to pay for the next invasion. A cold, efficient, merciless loop. In Oslo, gold was transported through the night in trucks before the Germans arrived. In Paris, gold reserves were rushed southward in sealed train cars. In Brussels, people fled with gold bars strapped to their bodies like talismans of survival. And in London, as German bombs rained down, the Bank of England moved its entire gold reserve into vaults so deep that people joked even the end of the world couldn't reach them. Then came one special place, Switzerland, a neutral nation surrounded by war, whose gold vaults functioned like a silent transit station for the shadows. Gold from occupied nations passed through Switzerland to be exchanged for foreign currency, oil, and steel. A flow of metal with no flag, no ideology, only cold value. Let your mind picture this. While above the ground there were bombs and fire and death, deep beneath the earth, gold lay motionless as if it did not belong to this world. It did not change color. It did not burn. It did not crack. It did not fear. Across both world wars, gold revealed a chilling truth. It does not belong to peace. It belongs to chaos. When the world is calm, people forget gold. When the world trembles, gold becomes the center. So when the war finally ended, world leaders understood. If they didn't find a way to restrain gold, gold would continue to determine the fate of nations. And they decided to make one final attempt, to build a system where gold stood behind the curtain and currencies stood before it. That place was Bretton Woods. Let your breath settle into the post-war air, not peaceful, but exhausted. A dry, hollow quiet, like a room still smelling of smoke after the fire has died. In 1944, the world looked around and found only one question left. If gold is the one thing that runs faster than every army, how do we restrain it? The answer was Bretton Woods. Picture a grand wooden hotel tucked inside a forest of New Hampshire pines. Outside, wind brushes against the eaves and small waves tap the dark blue lake. Inside, 730 delegates from 44 nations sit in a long, crowded hall, thick with heat and the sound of pages turning. They had not come to celebrate victory. They had come to stitch the world back together. No one trusted the pure gold standard anymore. Too rigid, too breakable, too dangerous in wartime. But no one trusted undisciplined paper money either. Too soft, too easy to inflate, too easy to deceive. So they tried to design something halfway between those extremes. Gold, but not entirely gold paper, but not entirely paper. Half real, half imagined, a system as strange as the dreams of the 20th century itself. And in that meeting room, one idea took shape. If the world could not be tied to gold, then tie it to a currency redeemable for gold. That currency was the USD, not because America was the strongest nation, but because after World War II, the United States was the only major country still holding gold. Picture the vaults of Fort Knox, hundreds of thousands of bars stacked like metal walls, flashlights casting pale beams across them like strips of cold moonlight. While Europe burned to ashes, America became the sanctuary of the world's gold. And so, the Bretton Woods Order was written as a promise: 1 ounce of gold, $35 a USD. Every other currency, a fixed rate against the USD. A system rotating around a single axis, the United States. This created a strange effect. Gold was no longer traded directly. It stood behind the curtain. The USD took the stage. Gold was no longer an actor. It became a prop. But the world believed in the system, at least for the early years. Because after the war, everyone wanted one thing: stability. Bretton Woods offered exactly that: stable exchange rates, expanding trade, reconstruction everywhere, new roads laid, factories rebuilt, shattered nations are taking their first breath again. Everything revolved around the USD, and behind the USD stood American gold. But a tiny crack began spreading beneath the glossy surface. Bretton Woods could only survive if two truths remained intact. First, the United States had to hold more gold than the dollars it issued. Second, other nations had to believe that America would never let that ratio slip. But the post-war world did not stand still. Europe revived, Japan surged, global trade exploded, money flowed faster than gold. The United States began printing USD to fund the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Johnson's Great Society programs, global investment packages. Every new dollar printed added another promise, a promise gold could no longer back. Picture a night in Paris in the late 1960s. President Charles de Gaulle stands before his advisors, studying international balance sheets. It says, "We will convert our USD into gold." He knew what the world did not want to see. America was issuing more dollars than it had gold to redeem. When France converted its dollars, other nations followed. Gold flowed out of the U.S. like blood draining from a fresh wound. Fort Knox thinned. The promise of 35 USD per ounce grew fragile. This was the moment the world finally realized a truth no one wished to admit. Bretton Woods was not a financial system. It was a collective belief. And that belief was weakening. By 1971, the pressure reached its peak. The USD was under attack. Nations demanded gold urgently. U.S. reserves fell to historic lows. President Nixon appeared on television. His face under the studio lights looked tight, hesitant, as if he were about to speak a truth he himself did not want to believe. Then he said, "The United States will temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold." One sentence, but it ended an entire era. That was the moment the tether between the USD and gold snapped. Not temporarily, forever. What happens when money is no longer tied to gold? What happens when the world enters the age of pure paper currency? What happens when gold is no longer part of the system, but returns to its oldest, rawest identity? Let your mind return to that summer moment in 1971, a Washington night thick and suffocating like the breath of an overheated engine. Inside the White House, the doors stayed shut. Economic advisors moved back and forth with bruised, sleepless eyes, and on President Richard Nixon's desk lay a single number that made the entire global financial system shudder. America no longer had enough real gold to redeem all the USD it had issued. The world was standing at the edge of a truth no nation wanted to face. The planet's collective trust had grown larger than the amount of gold resting in Fort Knox, and no illusion could hide that forever. Imagine the evening of August 15th. Nixon walked into the studio, placed both hands on the table as if trying to steady the weight of history. He looked straight into the camera and spoke slowly. "The United States will temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold." A sentence that sounded technical, but was in fact a lightning bolt splitting apart a financial order that had lasted nearly a century. When Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold, he didn't just change the value of a currency, he changed the foundation of the world. From that moment on, money was no longer backed by gold. Money was backed by governments. A completely new system was born. Fiat currency, money based on trust. No more 1 ounce Dakmar 35 USD. No more fixed valuations. No more gold redemption. No more limits on how much money could be issued. The world became a ship with its anchor cut, drifting into open waters, untethered to any rock beneath. And the first waves arrived quickly. In the months following Nixon's announcement, the price of gold danced like a creature suddenly freed from its cage. From 35 USD, it jumped to 50, then 70, then past 100, then 200. And within just a few years, gold reached levels the world had never imagined. What had once been treated as a technical convention suddenly became the symbol of fear. Picture America in the early 1970s. Fuel shortages, cars lined up for blocks at gas stations. Inflation is simmering like a fever without end. Prices are rising day by day. Wages are chasing hopelessly behind. Families are taking out mortgages with soaring interest rates. Congress arguing. The central bank is scrambling. And amid the dizziness, people did what humans have done for thousands of years. They turned back to gold. Not because gold earns profit, not because gold is clever, but because gold is real. Not like bonds, not like USD, not like political promises, not like central bank assurances. Gold, as always, simply stood there, silent, unchanged. For many Americans, accustomed to the calm stability of the Bretton Woods era, it felt as if they had fallen into a world without gravity. Money floated. Governments flooded the system with liquidity. Interest rates jolted violently, and gold rose like a lantern guiding people through the dark. But this wasn't only America's story. In Europe, central banks were bewildered. In Japan, the yen had to be adjusted repeatedly. In the Middle East, the oil crisis made gold the primary refuge. In South America, inflation chewed through entire national currencies. And then, something unexpected happened. When money was no longer tied to gold, people tied themselves to gold to avoid losing direction. Imagine an ordinary worker in 1975. He doesn't read economic newspapers. He doesn't understand interest rates or monetary policy. But he knows one thing. The banknote in his wallet today may buy less tomorrow. But his wife's gold ring? Tomorrow it's still gold. This is the most primal human instinct, a natural reaction to chaos. Find something that stays still. And gold has stayed still longer than anything in human history. Yet, despite the early turmoil, fiat money opened a new possibility. Governments could finally adjust the economy as needed, no longer constrained by the amount of gold in their vaults. Money could stretch, expand, or contract. Finance could become flexible, a living organism adapting to its environment. From a cold analytical perspective, breaking gold away from money was a major leap for modern economics. But from the perspective of the human mind, it was the moment the world lost its final anchor. And so, from this point forward, a question began threading through every crisis, every market collapse, every inflationary wave. If money isn't backed by gold, then what is truly real? That question would return again and again. In the 1970s, during the oil shocks, through the Cold War, and the financial crisis of 2008. But before those storms arrived, the 1970s-80s would become the era when gold turned into the heartbeat of global anxiety. A heartbeat frantic and uneven, spiking at every shock, trembling at every uncertainty, as if the world were asking itself each day, what do we still believe in? Tonight, let your mind drift into the 1970s, a decade in which the entire world seemed to breathe in short, uneven gasps like a patient who has just lost his pacemaker. That pacemaker was Bretton Woods, and when it vanished, humanity had nothing left to cling to, except gold. Inflation seeped into American homes like warm, suffocating air, leaking through every crack in the door. Bills rose, wages rose, but could not keep pace. Gasoline became a luxury. Gas stations hung signs reading, "out of stock." Lines of cars curled around city blocks, silent like some collective ritual of despair. In 1973, OPEC tightened its oil supply. The industrial world convulsed. The entire global economy, dependent on oil like blood, began to tremble. Meanwhile, the price of gold shot upward day after day, not because the industry needed more of it, not because supply was scarce, but because of one simple truth. This was an era when people didn't trust people and didn't trust the money printed by their own governments. When trust devalues, gold appreciates. Imagine an ordinary dinner in America in 1974. A family switches on the radio and hears the update. Gold hits another record high. The next day, another record. Gold rose as if it were mirroring the heartbeat of the global economy. Every shock sends it jumping. But gold didn't surge just because of the United States. Europe feared currency collapse. Asia braced for inflation carried along trade routes. South America fought against waves of debt crises. Everywhere, people turned to gold as the only shelter left standing while everything else around them melted. Imagine a father in Brazil during the era of hyperinflation. His monthly salary arrived yesterday. Today, it is worth half. He grips the few gold coins he bought last month, solid, cold, silent. Yet the only things in his life that seemed not to betray him. That is the depth of psychology fiat money can never reach. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, oil-rich nations were earning enormous amounts of foreign currency from soaring oil prices. They used a part of it to buy gold, as if storing sunlight inside vaults in case the day came when oil was no longer king. Gold at that time was like the global heartbeat monitor. Every spike was a forceful thump. Every dip was an exhale. The gold chart of the 1970s, 80s was not a metal chart. It was an emotional chart. Fear, anxiety, uncertainty, loss of trust. The world wasn't just dealing with inflation. It faced supply chain failures, energy crises, the Cold War, rising public debt, geopolitical shocks on repeat, and every time another economic door slammed shut, gold became the only door that remained open. Think of this in a whisper. Gold doesn't pay bills, doesn't create oil, doesn't end wars, doesn't reduce debt, but gold lets people sleep because they believe they are holding something that will not vanish by morning. That belief, primal, instinctive, survival-driven, has lasted thousands of years and burns brightest when the world has no stable structure left. Inside central bank offices, officials opened vaults, checked gold bars, and documented them carefully, like doctors tracking the heartbeat of a critical patient. No country said it aloud, but every country understood. Gold was the last line. If everything else failed, gold would be the final support. That's why during crises, even late into the 20th century, national gold reserves were considered assets that must never be sold. In many cases, not even war could force their sale. Governments would sell oil, sell state companies, sell bonds. But gold, they held onto it like holding onto their final breath. And then something interesting began to happen as global finance evolved. Gold no longer sat quietly in vaults. It began to duplicate, to replicate, appearing in ledgers, in contracts, in financial markets. 1 ounce of real gold could appear in 10 different contracts. Gold developed shadows. And that leads to the next chapter. When gold enters the age of data, an era in which its value lives not only in the metal itself, but in the numbers dancing across screens. Let the space around you sink a level deeper, like walking down a cold stone staircase, guided only by a faint yellow light, before stepping into a vault so vast your own breath echoes back at you. This is where modern gold lives, no longer in mines, no longer on warships, no longer in church chests or in the leather pouches of ancient merchants. Gold now resides in the anonymous vaults of global finance, places most people could hardly imagine ever standing close to. Picture the gold vault of the Federal Reserve in New York, more than 25 meters underground. Walls so thick that no bomb could break through, no windows, no natural light, only rows of gold bars arranged with perfect precision, silent like ancient books recording the world's history in a language no one reads. Each bar has its own number, its own weight, its own purity, its own identity. Gold belonging to the United States, gold belonging to Germany, gold belonging to the Netherlands, gold belonging to Japan, gold belonging to nations that want to remain unseen, but want their gold protected. All of it blended together in darkness. This is the world in which gold no longer belongs to individuals. It belongs to nations. But a massive shift is quietly unfolding, a shift that will take gold from the deepest chambers of the earth onto computer screens. As modern financial markets evolved, people realized you don't need to touch gold to trade gold. You don't need to count gold bars. You don't need to open vault doors. You only need data. And thus, paper gold was born. At first, it was merely warehouse receipts, paper certifying that you owned a portion of some bar stored somewhere. Then came gold futures, where people bought and sold metal that hadn't been mined yet, melted yet, or even existed. Then gold ETFs, funds, replicating the price of gold, where a single click could replace lifting a 13-kilogram bar. 1 ounce of real gold lying in a cold, deep vault could suddenly represent 10, 20, even 50 ounces of gold on balance sheets, not because gold multiplied, but because humans multiplied it through belief. Just like the early days of banking and warehouse receipts, gold once again became an idea rather than a substance. Imagine an investor in Tokyo buying gold, not physical gold, but a glowing number on a screen. No clinking metal, no smell of molten ore, no weight pressing into the palm, only the moving line on a chart. Meanwhile, in a vault in London or New York, the real bar remains still, unaware that it is being bought and sold hundreds of times an hour. The modern world has created a parallel version of gold, a constantly traded replica, fast, light, invisible. No more wagons carrying gold across borders, no more spreading gold across tables to sign treaties, no more paying soldiers with coins. Gold of the 21st century has become a kind of global backup heart, not to be used, but to exist. In central banks, officials monitor gold reserves like doctors monitoring oxygen levels in an ICU. Not for immediate use, but in case the entire system stops breathing. A paradox both strange and revealing. Gold in the age of financialization is traded more than ever, yet touched less than ever. It is like a metallic ghost, everywhere, yet nowhere. But the truth is, gold remains the final destination of trust. Screen-based trades are sometimes just promises, futures contracts are guesses, ETFs are wrappers, but real gold, the silent bar lying deep underground, it is the one thing the financial system does not dare underestimate. You can see this in recent crises. When markets crash, gold rises. When banks wobble, gold rises. When war breaks out, gold rises. When bonds fall, gold rises. Gold is no longer money, no longer standard, no longer a medium of exchange. But it is still a refuge, like a hidden room in a house renovated 100 times. Even if everything else changes, that room is always kept intact. And along the path from national vaults to digital ETFs, gold has lost part of its old soul to enter a new era, the era of replicas. But before we step into that realm of shadows, there is another story, darker, harsher, truer, dirty gold. Gold smeared with blood, mercury, and illegal mines. Gold belonging to people who have no choice but to dig deep into the earth, sometimes into their own graves. The next part will open that dark side. Let the light in the room soften a little, as if we're leaving the cold, fortified gold vaults of New York and London and descending into another world entirely, darker, wetter, and guarded by no one. If the gold in central bank vaults is the backup heart of the global economy, then the gold from illegal mines is the black blood running underneath it. Both worlds lie within the same supply chain. And not everyone wants to see that. Picture an early morning in the Amazon rainforest. Mist still clings to the leaves. The air smells of moisture, rotting wood, and something metallic, faintly sweet. In the middle of a valley, enormous pits scar the ground like wounds on the earth's skin. These are not regulated mines. There are no industrial machines, only makeshift tents, water pumps, saws, shovels, and hundreds of people working in silence. Children carry bowls of dirt. Women wash ore with their bare hands. Men pour mercury into pans to gather gold, forming a shiny amalgam that will be heated until mercury vapor rises into the air. That vapor settles in their lungs, falls into rivers, seeps into their skin, flows into a mother's milk, and disappears from sight, but not from their bodies. Let your mind linger on that image. Gold born from poison. Because mercury is the fastest, cheapest way to separate gold from earth and stone. And in illegal mines, in the Amazon, in Africa, and Southeast Asia, time is survival. No one checks safety standards, no labor contracts, no protective gear, no law. Only tarpaulin huts, gunshots in the night for territory, and middlemen willing to buy anything as long as it glitters. Travel a little farther, to the mountain ridges of Congo and the Sahel. There, gold is extracted from tunnels so narrow that an adult must crawl like moving through a sewer pipe. No light, no oxygen, only the smell of earth, sweat, and the fear of collapse. Many who crawl in never crawl out again. But the gold does. It is gathered by traders, carried across border footpaths and mixed into legitimate gold streams at refineries in Dubai, Turkey, and India. Hold this picture in your mind. A pristine bank vault gold bar may contain the blood of the nameless people who dug it out. This is the paradox of modern gold. It is a symbol of stability and a product of chaos. Criminal organizations know this all too well. They use illegal gold to launder money, move it across borders, convert it into USD, and from there buy guns, narcotics, and influence. Gold, once housed in temples, it is now one of the most effective money laundering tools on earth. No advanced technology needed, no electronic trace, no dependence on banks. Just melt it, recast it, and gold becomes anonymous. This is why dirty gold can slip into the global supply chain. Because once gold is melted, you cannot tell whether it came from a luxury vault in Switzerland or a mercury-soaked pit in the Amazon. Metal carries no memory. The trade carries the memory. And the path gold travels is often covered in shadows. But beneath the environmental devastation and the toxic rivers, the most heartbreaking truth is this repetition of history. Thousands of years ago, forced labor dug gold for the Spanish Empire in Potosi. Today, the poorest people in the world dig gold to feed unnamed empires, cartels, mafias, armed militias. The story repeats, only now it happens in the rainforest instead of the Andes. The rich buy gold to sleep well. The poor dig gold and never sleep well again. We speak of gold as a safe haven. But in the next part, when we look from above, you'll see the environmental cost. And it is anything but safe. Because every ounce of gold in a ring or in a reserve bar carries a trail behind it. A burned forest, a poisoned river, a torn-up landscape, and lives crushed beneath rock and soil. In the darkness of dirty gold, the world must face a hard truth. The brighter gold shines, the thicker the shadow behind it becomes. And the next part will widen that shadow even more. When gold doesn't just stain the hands of those who dig it, but stains some of the largest forests on the planet. Let your mind rise one level higher, as if we're standing on an invisible drone, hovering above the densest forests on the planet, looking down at something the human eye normally never sees. And in that view, you realize this. For the rich to feel safer, the forests must die. In the Amazon, the ground is torn apart like the raw, flayed skin of an animal. What used to be pristine rainforest, lush, wet, filled with birdsong, has become scarred pits, streaks of yellow-brown earth, and swamps thick with mercury-tainted mud. Giant trees, hundreds of years old, are cut down, burned, reduced to charred trunks, like the half-burned bones of some ancient creature. Between those scars are pools of cloudy water full of chemicals, gray-silver like the matte surface of an unpolished gold bar. Every year, hundreds of thousands of hectares of Amazon forest are opened, dug, or burned just to find a few ounces of gold. 1 ounce, barely 31 grams, just a handful of metal. But in return, millions of cubic meters of forest are destroyed. Picture that in silence, 31 grams of gold, exchanged for hundreds of tons of trees, soil, and life. These fires are not accidents. They are a strategy. Burn the forest to drive out wildlife. Burn to expose the soil. Burn so illegal miners can seize territory. Burn so no authority can easily trace them. The flames spread fast in the dry season, driving away millions of birds, snakes, troops of monkeys, and entire species science has not yet named. If you stand inside one of those pits, you will smell scorched earth, diesel from water pumps, the sharp odor of heavy metals, and mercury, sweet, acrid, and sick like a poisoned river. But the most frightening thing is not the smell. It is the silence, No birds, no insects, no leaves rustling, only the drone of pumps and the clink of shovels striking stone, the numb rhythm of a black market economy. Move beyond the Amazon, and you'll see the same story elsewhere. In Ghana, forests have been replaced by sun-scorched patches of bare earth. In Mongolia, vast steppes are pocked with deep pits. In Indonesia, entire islands are hollowed out. In Myanmar, gold extracted from conflict zones fuels wars that have lasted decades. All these places share one truth: gold does not come from mines, it comes from dismantled ecosystems. A strange paradox appears. The people are buying gold to protect themselves from an uncertain future, are unknowingly helping make that future even more unstable. Because forests are not just trees, they are the planet's climate regulators. They hold water, hold soil, store carbon. Forests are the planet's breath. When forests are burned to feed gold's hunger, we lose more than the environment. We lose the ability to control the climate. And gold, that silent metal, becomes a hidden protagonist in the story of global warming. Take a moment to feel this strange contrast. Gold sits quietly in Zurich's luxury vaults, in sterile safes in Singapore, in the living rooms of wealthy families, glowing soft and serene. But to create that glow, another place on the planet must sink into smoke and toxins. This is an unspoken exchange, a silent complicity. And perhaps the saddest part of all, does that gold ever intend to harm anyone? It simply lies still. It is humans, with fear, greed, and the desire for absolute safety, who have turned gold into an engine of destruction. From a wider view, gold stands at a strange crossroads, promoted as the safest haven, while its environmental cost is the farthest thing from safety. That is the core paradox of modern gold: soft light on the surface and thick darkness underneath. But the deeper question lies in the human mind. Why do we still believe in gold, even knowing its cost is far higher than the numbers suggest? Why does gold, a metal useless for survival, become the thing that helps us sleep? The answer lies in the next part: the psychology of gold. The most primal reason we can never let it go. Let your mind settle for a moment, as if, after witnessing burned forests and poisoned rivers, you're now sitting in a quieter, darker room with a single whispered question echoing inside your head. Why do we still seek gold? And why can't we let it go? This is not a question for economists, not for miners, not for investors. This is a question for the human mind, for the collective memory that stretches back thousands of years. Let's begin at the deepest point: the fear of loss. Nothing terrifies humans more than the feeling that what they hold in their hands could disappear overnight. And money, as history repeatedly proves, disappears very quickly. Hyperinflation, bank failures, currency collapse, government bankruptcy, war, a sudden political decision. But gold does not disappear. Across 6,000 years, gold has never vanished unless humans threw it away. It does not rot. It does not rust. It does not decay. It is not eaten by termites. It cannot be destroyed by fire. It is not washed away by water. It is untouched by time. To our primitive brain, gold is the symbol of what cannot be lost. But fear is not the only reason. There is also memory. Imagine your grandparents' pillow, old cotton fabric. Looks like any other pillow, but inside, they hid a few small gold tails. Not to show off, not to invest, but to survive if everything fell apart. In many Asian families, this memory is passed down without words. It lives inside stories of currency reforms, of fleeing chaos, of saving tiny amounts just to stay alive. A single gold tael becomes a collective memory, a lesson carried from one generation to the next. With gold, you have peace of mind. No economics course can erase that, but deeper than fear and memory, gold enters the human psyche through something unique, its indestructibility. Humans revere things that outlast time: stone statues, pyramids, the stars, and gold, a metal that looks like frozen light. In our subconscious, we believe that anything that time cannot destroy must hold eternal value, even if we cannot eat it, drink it, or build a house with it. The value of gold is the value of belief, a powerful collective placebo. Even when science tells us gold is useless in survival, the human brain reacts to it like a sacred object, a lullaby, a sedative. It is no coincidence that every ancient civilization associated gold with gods. Gold was something they could not understand, so they feared it, worshipped it, sent it with the dead, wrapped it around their deities, used it as a passport to the afterlife. That psychology didn't disappear with central banks or gold ETFs, it merely changed shape. Today, many people buy gold not to become rich. They buy it to sleep well. They fear an economic shock, fear bank failures, fear of losing savings, fear war, fear invisible things beyond their control. And in that darkness, gold feels like a small oil lamp, not bright enough to light the whole room, but just enough to chase away the feeling of being lost. This is gold's greatest psychological power, not in price, not in supply and demand, not in industry, but in emotion. Gold gives humans the feeling of holding something real, something heavy, cold, solid, untouchable by government decrees, unhackable by computers, unaffected by inflation, and in a world full of intangible things, digital money, digital contracts, data, symbols, indices, algorithms, the hunger to touch something real grows stronger than ever. Gold is that reality. But like any long journey, the psychology of gold brings us to one final question. If gold is the mirror of human fear and hope, then what is its ultimate legacy? A mirror that never breaks, but reflects things we sometimes don't want to see. And that is where the story will end. In the next part, like a nighttime lullaby, as we look back from beginning to end at gold's journey, from a tiny metal speck in an ancient river to digital vaults, to understand that gold is neither good nor bad. It simply reflects us. Tonight, after a long journey across 6,000 years of history, let your breath slow down as if you were standing before a vast underground vault, warm golden light reflecting off silent metal bars, and knowing that each one of them holds more stories than any book ever written. Gold, a metal that cannot speak. Yet it is humanity's most loyal witness. We first encountered it in prehistoric streams, tiny, shimmering grains that humans didn't understand but somehow felt familiar. From there, gold moved through mythology, through Egyptian tombs, through Greek temples, through the battlefields of Greece and Persia, through Rome's dream of invincibility, through the dark halls of medieval churches, across the backs of camels along the Silk Road, and across the Mediterranean with Musa, shaking entire kingdoms. Then it crossed oceans with the conquistadors, fed Potosi, burned empires, triggered inflation across Europe, became the anchor of banks, ignited the California-Australia Klondike gold rushes, bound nations to the gold standard, then fled from wars like the soul of a hunted nation. It lived in Bretton Woods as a shadow behind the curtain. It regained its freedom in 1971 like a beast unchained. It danced to the heartbeat of inflation, hid inside national vaults, split itself into paper gold, and quietly flowed through Amazonian mines, African pits, and rivers tainted with mercury and blood. And throughout this entire journey, gold did not change. Only we did. Let your mind drift across a simple image, a gold bar resting on an old wooden table. Light falls across its edge, casting a soft glow like moonlight on a still lake. If you place your hand on it, you will feel its coldness, its weight, It's silent. But you will not feel. The valleys carved open, the forests burned, the rivers are poisoned, the wars funded, the empires built on fear, the stolen sleep of the miners, the sleepless nights of those who guard it. Gold does not speak of any of that. It only reflects. But when you look at it long enough, you see inside it the silhouette of yourself, the desire for safety, the fear of chaos, the longing for immortality, the obsession with what cannot be lost. In a way, gold is not the story of a metal. It is the story of humanity. Ancient civilizations touched it with hands full of wonder. We touch it with hands full of anxiety. They tied it to their gods. We tie it to our savings accounts. They hid it in tombs. We hide it in vaults. They used it as a passport to the afterlife. We use it to sleep peacefully in this life. And then a question, soft as a breath, appears at the end of the tale. If gold reflects the soul of each era, then what is our generation reflecting? The gentle glow of modern gold may no longer be the glow of divinity, nor the glow of empire, nor the glow of victory. It is the glow of fear, but also the glow of hope that something enduring still exists in a world that changes every day. And as the night closes, leave one small thought in your mind. Perhaps what matters is not the gold itself, but the reason humans cannot walk away from it. Because anything we chase for 6,000 years, whether power, safety, or immortality, reveals far more about us than about the thing we chase. And the story of gold is not over. It is simply waiting for its next chapter, written by those who will live after us. It might be digital money. It might be green energy. It might be a new crisis. It might be a turning point we cannot yet imagine. But gold will still be there, silent, cold, without judgment, waiting to see what humanity chooses next. Now you may close your eyes. The story has ended, but the journey of gold, and our journey, continues out there, beneath the gentle glow on its surface and the deep dark